All right, let's do this one last time.
5 months. It has been 5 months since I last made a video on this series. In fact, almost 6 months. And honestly, even though in the comments I said I was going to make another video on this series, in my heart, I wasn't entirely sure I was telling the truth. I always felt like, it's just so much. And I really enjoyed the first season. Do I want to risk it with the second season? But here we are. So, let's dive back into the Ultimate Spider-Man. Now, 12 years later. Season 2 of Ultimate Spider-Man started airing on the 21st of January, 2013. So technically, it's still 11 years later, but the first season started airing in 2012, so with an average episode rating of 7.4 out of 10 to Season 1's 7.3, I wasn't really expecting much of a difference with this season, but this season, to no one's surprise, felt more solidified. Season 1, while good, did have a lot of episodes I referred to as cameo episodes in my first video, and while yes, Season 2 does have some guest characters showing up in episodes, it doesn't feel quite as clickbaity as Season 1. As sometimes in Season 1, it felt like they were just putting popular characters into episodes to boost the ratings. The guesting characters of Season 2 really felt as though they were part of this larger off-screen world that we get introduced to every now and then. Like members of S.H.I.E.L.D. that can be called upon when the main Spider-Man crew doesn't quite have the skill set needed for the mission at hand. And speaking of the main crew, I will quickly do a reintroduction since this video is 5 months after the first one. Returning to Season 2, we have Danny Rand, aka Iron Fist, Luke Cage, aka Power Man, Sam Alexander, aka Nova, Ava Ayala, aka White Tiger, and of course our main man of spiders himself, Peter Parker, coming together to form Spider-Man's classic team, according to the Daily Bugle fandom, though I'm not sure if this title is ever actually used in the show. Additionally, just before jumping into this season, I will say some information I am intentionally leaving out of this video as I go over it in the first video. So if you have not seen that and are slightly lost, please go ahead and watch that one first. And now that we're all caught up, we can dive into my 82 pages of notes that I took while watching Season 2. In my first video on Ultimate Spider-Man, I split the season up into 2 categories: cameo episodes and story episodes. But this season I can't really do that, so instead I will be going through the episodes in order and giving a basic summary of what happens, and additionally any moments that I lived for, aka MILFs. Okay, but jokes to one side, I will be mentioning moments that have significance later on in the season. So, coming into episode 1, titled The Lizard, we see the gang fighting Doc Ock, who's now back on fighting form from the ending of last season. They manage to fight off the Doc, who leaves behind a briefcase full of animal DNA serums. One of them, of course, being a lizard. After the fight, the gang quickly rush off, as a timer that's been on the screen has slowly been approaching 0, which we learn is actually a timer for when Aunt May gets home. Aunt May is someone that I didn't really mention in my first video, though I feel like I should have, because personally, I really love this show's portrayal of Aunt May. She is still drawn as an older lady, but she is oftentimes written to be living up life, like doing all kinds of sporty activities, including outlifting me,
skinny bitch,
and it's honestly very funny and makes this depiction of Aunt May really stand out from the other ones. Another thing that I will mention that's coming over from Season 1 is that the helicarrier that exploded at the end of Season 1 is still under construction, so we have all of the gang still living in Peter Parker's house. Which, honestly, I would have just loved to have a full episode dedicated to house shenanigans and everyone trying to live together under one roof. But anyways, moving back into hero time, we see Spidey on his spider cycle that he got given to him in Season 1. Connors gives Spidey an upgrade to his web shooters, and as they talk about the recovered animal DNA serums, we get some classic lizard foreshadowing before they accidentally set off a booby trap, which causes everything in the lab to fucking explode. Spidey gets caught under some rubble, and now it's up to Connors to try and save Spider-Man from a laser bot that was also activated alongside the booby traps. So Doc Connors, being a genius scientist, decides to tap into his brain knowledge and starts using the Pythagoras theorem and the theory of relativity and leverage and... No, he decides in his wisdom to just go full lizard, which surprisingly works in his favor, as he ends up saving Spider-Man and even helping him to defeat the rest of the robots. And we get this incredible animated title sequence in the style of the 1981 Spider-Man animated show, which was most definitely a MILF moment. Though unfortunately, this hype moment doesn't last very long, as Doc Connors, being the gambling addict that he is, decides to take more of the serum and ends up going full lizard, making him instinctively go after Doc Ock, which inevitably leads to a three-way fight between Doc Connors, Doc Ock, and Spider-Man, where we are treated with another animated title sequence in the same style, but instead of Doc Connors and Spider-Man, we have Doc Ock and Spider-Man. And after that fight, the episode ends off with the rest of the gang showing up to help subdue the lizard, giving Spidey enough time to make an antidote, reverting the lizard back to Connors. While writing the script of the first episode, I realized that instead of calling something cameo or non-cameo like I did in the first video on Ultimate Spider-Man, in this video, I can call them origin episodes. As a perfect example, episode 1, The Lizard, would be considered an origin episode, and there are a few more in this season that will be considered origin episodes. So I will refer to some episodes as origin episodes. Just like episode 2, Electro, which starts with, you guessed it, Spider-Man fighting Electro, which ends in Spider-Man taser-webbing Electro and he just kind of disappears. And it's back at the Parker residence where we meet Electro 2.0 after a power outage. So the team suit up ready to fight him. That's better. Electro has taken over all of New York's electricity, leaving everyone without any power, which naturally turns the entire public against Spider-Man for like the millionth time. And during the power outage, we meet the side villain, Batroc the Leaper. A side villain referring to a villain that doesn't really pose much of a threat to the group, and is kind of there just to like fluff up some time or just be annoying. After making quick work of Batroc the Leaper, the gang chase after Electro, who's jumping from electronic to electronic. Though, the more electronics he takes over, the more he's stretched thin and his intelligence starts to, decrease, making him talk in an almost brain rot sort of fashion.
Yes! Yes, man! Man about town!
Skibbity toilet res.
Town clown!
So the gang use this to their advantage and trick Electro into taking over far more than he is capable, wearing him so thin that he loses all of his newfound power and returns back into his regular human form. It's at the end of this episode where I wrote in my notebook at the possibility of them setting up a Sinister 6, which to me was just the logical next step for the season. Please excuse the handwriting. And episode 3, titled The Rhino, only solidified my suspicions. This episode opens up with Spidey and Power Man helping evacuate a burning building, and as they stand there to celebrate, we meet the Rhino, which honestly I just want to say, the Electro and Rhino design, as well as some of the redesigns of characters in this season, are so fucking cool. After the title sequence, we cut into Midtown High, so we can assume that Rhino got away from that fight somehow. At Midtown High, we see the Flash up to his usual antics, bullying, as he bullies a new character called Alex. It really doesn't take a genius to see what the show was setting up here. Having a new villain and a suspiciously shady, nerdy character who gets bullied introduced at the same time doesn't really give much to imagine. But that reveal is for later. For now, we cut to hero time at night, where we see Power Man's motorcycle. Now, I am openly a hater of the spider cycle. I mentioned it in this video already, and I mentioned it in the previous video. I don't like it. I think it looks weird. I think it's goofy. However, the power bike fucks. It's just so cool. But anyways, Power Man and Spidey are sent to go look after a train that is delivering more of these animal DNA serums, which naturally gets attacked by the Rhino. But what's unnatural is that the Rhino is able to cut Power Man's skin, which, if you didn't know, Power Man's whole shtick, other than super strength, is that he has impenetrable skin. This moment quite literally made me verbally say, "Oh fuck," like out loud while watching, which honestly was very surprising, and as my own personal fault, I might have put Rhino on a higher podium than I should have after that moment. I originally thought that that moment was to hype up Rhino and show just how powerful he was. However, in hindsight, I now see that it's a moment used as a story beat to kind of take Power Man out of some scenes, such as allowing a 1v1 between Rhino and Spider-Man, and an additional, more down-to-earth moment between Spidey and the Flash, which I personally really loved, as we had this more sensitive, emotional moment showing a more vulnerable side to Flash. Rhino then follows Spidey and Flash to Flash's home, where he wreaks havoc, forcing an injured Power Man to have to hop into the fight to try and help Spider-Man. Eventually, both of them managing to subdue the Rhino and even turning him back into Alex in front of the Flash, which gives him a somewhat deserved lesson. Like, I agree, bullying is very bad. But then having a mutated Rhino try and kill you because of it might be a little bit far in terms of life lessons. And while it has happened in other episodes already, I'm going to use this moment to mention that this season has some really cool KO action screens that I personally got really excited to see at the end of every episode or major fight. Episode 4, Kraven the Hunter, was one of my personal favorites, as Kraven is someone that we don't get a lot of depictions of in the mainstream Spider-Man media. The only mainstream Kraven that comes to mind is from the newer PlayStation game. This episode, like episodes 1, 2, and 3 so far, is another origin episode. Though, what splits this one apart from the others is that this origin episode is not just the origin of Kraven, but is also used as an origin episode for White Tiger, as we open up on White Tiger losing control of herself and attacking the other members of the group in an almost feral-like manner. We learn through a conversation between Spider-Man, Nick Fury, and Coulson that Ava gets her White Tiger powers from the White Tiger amulet that she carries on her belt. And it's that amulet that's making her go feral as she's losing control of its power. It's actually later in this episode where we meet Kraven, as Spidey and Ava go up against him. It's also this moment where we learn that Kraven hunted, as in killed, Ava's father and grandfather, and that he's here in New York to do the exact same thing to her. So the fight between the three of them goes on, and eventually ends up in Central Park Zoo. And due to some quick hands and some fancy knife work, Kraven steals the White Tiger amulet from Ava, leaving her completely powerless. And as he gains all of the White Tiger power, we get our first of this season's furry transformations. Yes, there is more than one. So, Spidey and White Tiger decide to retreat from the Thundercats knockoff and come up with a plan to regain the amulet. And through some quick-wittedness, teamwork, and trust, they manage to actually reclaim the amulet from Kraven, even defeating him. Though, after defeating Kraven, Ava goes in for the fucking kill. leading Spider-Man to try have a heart-to-heart with her, giving the whole great power, great responsibility speech. And the episode ends off with them having a heart-to-heart moment on the rooftops. And I'm 99% sure this moment is the reason White Tiger is listed as an ally, friend, teammate, and possible love interest on the wiki. Though then again, something might happen in season 3 that I'm just unaware of. And I'm not really one to ship, but this ship is one that I stand by. Also, just as a note, I loved Kraven's voice in this episode.
Your father would have never taken a bait so easily. He was crafty, strong. He understood the power of the amulet.
I honestly thought it was Bruce Dubose who voices Marcus in the Borderlands series. However, it's actually Diedrich Bader. And now moving on from one of my favorite episodes, we move into an episode I didn't really fuck with. Episode 5, Hawkeye. And if you can't tell from the title, it's just that. An episode about Hawkeye. Well, Spider-Man and Hawkeye teaming up. The only real piece of information we need to take from this episode is that the helicarrier is still under construction, but it does hint towards the helicarrier being done at some point within the season. Oh, and of course, Spider-Man doing a JoJo reference. Also, just before we hop into episode 6, I apologize for the lighting. The sun cannot decide whether it wants to be out or whether it wants to be nighttime. Episode 6, aptly named Sinister 6, starts with the gang doing some training on the Statue of Liberty before receiving a call from Doc Connors. So, Spider-Man in his wisdom decides to go alone to this definitely not suspicious call that definitely isn't a trap. Wink wink. Where, surprise, it was a trap! Who could have thunk that? And we're introduced to the Sinister Six. We get our first instance of these Marvel Snap-like character intro images, which becomes more prevalent as the season continues. So naturally, 6 against 1, Spider-Man gets jumped. And by jumped, I mean beat the fuck out of. So Spider-Man, using 1% of his full brain's capacity, decides to split the group up, so he can go after the lizard by himself and reverts him back to Connors. Which doesn't last long, as he is then re-reverted back into the lizard and the fight continues. Though, luckily for Spider-Man, the collateral damage of this fight is actually causing the tunnels to collapse, giving him a chance to escape. And once he escapes, he latches on to one of J. Jonah Jameson's news helicopters to signal to his crew to come help him with this ass beating. And so, the Friday night smackdown happens, Spider-Man's classic crew versus the Sinister Six, with each of them pitting themselves up against someone of equal caliber, before Spider-Man decides that this is probably not a good idea, and that they should all trade who they're fighting with, so that they have an advantage against their opponents. And so, the fight ends with them capturing all of the Sinister Six. Well, almost all of them. Unfortunately, the lizard gets away. Personally, I really enjoyed this as an introduction to this season's Sinister Six. While from episode 2, I suspected the Sinister Six was going to show up, I didn't expect them to be introduced so early into this season. Like, we have 20 more episodes of this season, and the big bad group has already been introduced. It really hyped me up for what the rest of the season was going to bring. Episode 7, titled Spider-Man, yes, accent included, is in its entirety almost like a diss track towards Boston. Now, as a British citizen, I'm unaware of any beef between New York City and Boston, though the shots fired in this episode, I can only imagine there's some kind of tension, if not light humor. The basic premise of this episode is that Spider-Man is tired of being hated on by the New York populace, so he decides to take a deal from Boston's mayor and goes to be their superhero. While in Boston, he's given a spider cave and a sidekick, and the rest of the story basically just follows the story of the Incredibles, with Spider-Man saying to his sidekick that he doesn't really want him or need him around, So the sidekick eventually turns evil and gives all the other villains in Boston high-powered tech. Though, since this is a one-episode fiasco, the sidekick eventually turns good and becomes Boston's Steel Spider. Now, this entire episode, I felt like I was on the outside of an inside joke. There were a fair few moments that I didn't quite understand, though I could gather from context clues. I can only surmise that the actual target audience for this episode would find everything pretty funny, but for me, it kind of just went over my head. And now, coming back full circle with episode 5 being a bit of a whiff, episode 6 being sick as fuck, episode 7 being nothing special, we're on to episode 8, Carnage. With one of the coolest episodes in the show so far, the episode opens up by revealing the Green Goblin is back. And then, on top of that, not only is Green Goblin back, he drops a fucking building on Spider-Man. And this is all before the title sequence. Though, of course, after the title sequence, the rest of Spider-Man's crew shows up to make sure he doesn't get crushed to death. And we're also treated to a very sweet moment between Peter and Harry with his very first appearance this season. And by sweet, I mean incredibly awkward. Though we are thankfully saved by the Green Goblin ripping the roof of the limo off as he comes to take Harry away. Except, psych, he's actually here for Peter Parker. So Peter ends up captured since he can't reveal he's Spider-Man in front of Harry, who openly hates Spider-Man, and he wakes up inside the Green Goblin's lab, where he's injected with the Venom symbiote. And for some reason, it's never actually mentioned why, the Venom symbiote morphs into the Carnage symbiote. So Carnage Peter is tasked with the job of killing Spider-Man, which kinda seems impossible, but you know, he gives it a real good go. And by real good go, I mean goes and tries to kill the rest of Spider-Man's squad, who are currently at Harry's house, because you know, Peter Parker just got kidnapped. So a fight breaks out that only ends when Harry convinces the Venom symbiote to leave Peter and refuse with him, turning Harry back into Season 1 Venom. The twists and turns in the story of this episode really make it stand out from some episodes that are quite linear. And so now that Harry is Venom again, he decides to go get some sweet, sweet revenge on the Goblin. And with Peter being freed from the Venom symbiote, he decides to mask back up and go and help Venom, though not obviously get revenge. Which turns into the Royal Rumble of the Century, starting out as a 2v1 and ending in a 1v1v1 betrayal. Because surprisingly, you can't really trust Venom to do the right thing. So everyone is just trying to fight everyone, and the fight ends with Harry denouncing the Venom symbiote, as the rest of Spider-Man's gang show up to lay the smackdown on Goblin before he escapes, ending the episode off with Peter being a less than terrible friend, and Goblin posed up like he's about to drop the hardest diss track.
One thing, I'm not a big fan of the government. 30 on 30. I'm not a big fan of the government.
Anyways, moving swiftly on to episode 9, titled House Arrest, we start the episode off with the squad fighting Freddy Fazbear, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s 173rd Most Wanted. And yes, I know it's not actually Freddy Fazbear, it's a villain called Grizzly, who just happens to be wearing an exoskeleton bear suit that definitely isn't Freddy Fazbear. After the gang deal with Mr. Fivebear, they leave Peter to deal with all of the police and the paperwork. And once Peter arrives home, later than usual, the gang is being very suspicious around him and not really letting him know what any of them are up to, which is kind of weird because it's technically his house. So this leads to Peter confronting Nova in the basement about what the fuck's going on with everyone, where they accidentally set off the shield security system that was secretly placed throughout the entire house, causing the house to go into full lockdown mode. While in lockdown mode, all of the appliances turn into killer robots, and the house seems like the house from, well, Monster House. And honestly, that's the rest of the episode, them just fighting the house. Other than the end of the episode, where the house collapses due to all the fighting, and S.H.I.E.L.D. pulls a Blue Peter, which is a British reference, and shows one they made earlier. And the episode ends with the gang revealing they wanted to throw Peter a surprise party, since the new helicarrier is finished construction and they will be moving out at the end of this episode. Which is a win for Peter, but a loss for me, because I don't get my fun, quirky, little slice of life episode. Episode 10, titled The Man-Wolf, was the most out of left field in the entire season, I feel. Episode 10 starts with the squad doing some training on the brand new Tri-Carrier, before receiving a mission from J. Jonah Jameson? In Season 1, we learned that J. Jonah Jameson's son, John, is an astronaut. And this episode builds on that information by having John, J. Jonah Jameson's son, trapped on the fucking lunar base. So, the gang are sent to the fucking moon. Now, honestly, there was a fair amount that this episode references that I didn't quite understand, though I assume it's all connected to Man-Wolf as a character, such as archaeology dig sites on the moon. John is being turned into the Man-Wolf by some moon gems, and this is where we get our second furry transformation. And after some good old classic moon gravity fighting, the squad bring John back down to Earth. I'm also just going to mention, like I have been doing at the end of every episode where I put my thoughts and opinions, but I think the spacesuits that were designed for this episode were really, really cool. I can imagine a fair few people didn't enjoy them, as they looked kind of bubbly and bulky, but to me, I really liked that design and how each of them were unique to each of the heroes. Episode 11, titled Swarm, is another quote-unquote origin episode, kind of. Though this episode is the origins of Swarm, Swarm the villain is later used as a side villain in all other appearances. Very much like Batroc, a side villain that causes more of a nuisance than a threat. This episode is a team-up between Iron Man and Spider-Man as they try to stop some of Spidey's tech from going rogue. And by going rogue, of course, I mean being possessed by Michael Tan, one of Tony Stark's employees. They work together to re-hack all of the robots, and everyone is saved. Except Michael. He is still very much atomized. And episode 12 is also pretty simplistic. The entire episode is based around Loki and Thor, similarly to Season 1's episode about them, where Asgardian magic was used to turn Thor into a frog. This episode uses Asgardian magic to turn everyone into a chibi form. So the chibified crew and Thor work together to defeat Loki and bring themselves back to normal. The only other note I will bring up from my, again, 82 pages of notes is that there is one section of this episode that has the default iPhone alarm blaring in the background non-stop, which is possibly one of the worst decisions you could do. It was unimaginably annoying, though that is more personal, as that was my default alarm during my entire span of high school and college. So it brings back early morning memories. And so we have reached our halfway point, episode 13, Journey of the Iron Fist. I have also realized, now that I've been sat here for about 2 hours recording, that this is probably going to end up being a very long episode. So after this episode, I will be shortening down my descriptions of these episodes and giving more basic overviews, unless, of course, they are an episode of importance. And by importance, I mean an origin episode, or one that lends itself to the overarching story of the season. Where the fuck did the sun go? Episode 13 starts in an old kung fu movie style based on Bruce Lee's 1978 Game of Death, which is also later referenced as the suit used in the Kill Bill movies. Before cutting to the actual episode, starting with Spidey and Iron Fist training on a bridge. They get interrupted by a ninja, and after a quick back and forth with Danny being poisoned unknowingly, a limousine pulls up and a Sensei Wu lookalike tells Danny that he needs to come with him. So we get this moment where Danny just tells Peter that, hey, I'm not going to be a part of the group anymore, and just leaves. Though, of course, shallow goodbyes is not something Spider-Man stands for, and decides to follow Danny all the way to the airport, sneaking on board his aeroplane, and then traveling to the north of India as they land in Kunlun, Iron Fist's original training ground. And unluckily for our out-of-place Spider, his day doesn't get any better, as once he lands, we are introduced to this show's version of Scorpion, training partner of Iron Fist, who is voiced by the guy who voices Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
No outside infidels may trespass on the sacred ground of Kunlun. So much for hospitality.
After a quick fight, Spidey is then shown around the temple, where Iron Fist explains to Spider-Man that he was only allotted 1 year to go and travel in the outside world to learn more about it before having to return home to become king. Though, of course, not before a trial. And as the poison from earlier begins to seep further into Iron Fist's body, he becomes too weak to be able to do said trial, meaning that Scorpion automatically becomes king of Kunlun. Except psych! Iron Fist pulls out his Uno reverse trap card, which is just Spider-Man doing the trial for him as a champion. With Iron Fist's champion chosen, we get this wonderful competition that shows the heart and character of both Spider-Man and Scorpion. And since the entire competition is based around having a good heart, of course, Spider-Man wins. Meaning that Iron Fist now has to stay here and become king. Except double psych again, because with the victory, Iron Fist is allowed 1 more year to go and explore the world some more. Yippee! And that ends that episode off. Honestly, as someone who doesn't know a lot about Iron Fist to start with, this episode was a bunch of fun. Not only was it a very nice team up between Spider-Man and Iron Fist, showing the bond that they have, it also introduced me to a lot about Iron Fist, and actually gave the character some screen time, as oftentimes Iron Fist feels like a side character to the side characters. Most episodes not really having many lines to say, or doing much episode to episode. So this was a very nice change of pace, and having Iron Fist gain a permanent strength boost because of this episode really solidified this as one of the better episodes of the season in my books. Okay, we have just now reached the halfway point. And I'm gonna be honest, we've been here a while. So I'm about to do a speed run of some of the episodes that don't have quite as much in as some of the others. Although that doesn't mean that I don't like these episodes or that they're not worth watching. I'm simply speedrunning them just to save some time on this video. Episode 14, titled The Incredible Spider-Hulk, is an alternate version of an episode from Season 1, with Spider-Man swapping bodies with another superhero. Last time it was Wolverine, this time it's The Incredible Hulk. Episode 16, titled Venom Bomb, has the Goblin being captured before releasing the Venom symbiote on the Tricarrier, infecting almost everyone, turning them into Venoms. While this one sounds like a mainline story, I'm adding it here as most things from this episode get resolved before the end. Episode 19, titled Stand By Me, is a Stan Lee cameo-centric episode. While Stan Lee has had some cameos throughout the season, this entire episode has him playing a minor character in this story, who is later revealed to be a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent that works at the school. Episode 20, titled Game Over, has Spider-Man, Captain America, and Wolverine teaming up to fight Arcade, based around video games and video game rules. Episode 24, titled Sandman's Return, deals with, well, Sandman's return, as a good guy going through therapy, and Spider-Man tries to help him go through that therapy, but maybe pushes him a little bit too far, as he goes past his breaking point and reverts back into a villain, before eventually being calmed down once again and given another chance. Where the fuck did the sun go again? Okay, so the remaining episodes are the ones that I want to dive deeper into. Episode 15, titled Ultimate Deadpool, works with a joke I said in my first video about Ultimate Spider-Man, how the show kind of lends itself better to Deadpool as a character rather than Spider-Man, as we now have an entire episode based on, well, just that. Deadpool being an old member of the S.H.I.E.L.D. program that Spidey is currently on. We learn that Deadpool is currently on a mission to find a rogue agent that has threatened to sell all of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s personal information on the superheroes. So Deadpool and Spidey team up to go face Taskmaster. Which, if that doesn't make sense with what I just previously said the episode was about, that is because in this show, Deadpool is fully portrayed as an anti-hero. I know in the films, Deadpool is portrayed more like a hero with different boundaries to the others. He's more comfortable with killing and overall just being a bit of a twat. Whereas here, Deadpool is portrayed more like he is in the comics, where he doesn't really care which side he's on morally, he just cares if he's getting paid. So we learn that there is no rogue agent, and it's actually Deadpool who's trying to sell all of the information. So Deadpool and Spidey get into a imagination fight, with both of them breaking the fourth wall and trying to out-fourth wall each other. Which sounds like it makes no sense, but was a very fun concept to watch. Another cool point that I wanted to bring up is that this episode didn't shy away from the comics interpretation of Taskmaster not being able to fight Deadpool. As we know, Taskmaster has the ability to copy and repeat any moves he sees, basically being able to beat anyone with their own moveset. However, when he fights Deadpool, he's unable to do that. As, if I remember correctly, it's because Deadpool's just insane, so he doesn't really know what Deadpool's next move is going to be. If that is wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments. And so, the episode ends off with Deadpool running away, and me with a big old smile on my face. Episodes 17 and 18 are origin episodes, similar to ones that we had previously about other members of the group. We've had origin episodes on White Tiger and Iron Fist, so now we get treated to origin episodes on Nova and Power Man. Episode 17, titled Guardians of the Galaxy, follows Nova's backstory as we meet Rocket Raccoon, a member of, well, the Guardians of the Galaxy. We, as an audience, learn that Nova is from an entirely different planet and is only half human. While I don't fully remember if it's brought up in Season 1, it is something that isn't mentioned a lot throughout the entire season. And so, for another episode, we get whisked away into space, as Nova and Spidey hop on Rocket's ship to go defeat the Chitauri. While trying to defeat them in a spaceship dogfight, a larger ship comes in through a portal, forcing them to surrender. And while on board the larger Chitauri vessel, that's so hard to say. While on board the larger Chitauri vessel, Rocket reveals that it was his plan to get captured all along, as the other members of the Guardians of the Galaxy are currently imprisoned on said ship. And after freeing them, we are introduced to the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy. So Spidey, Nova, and the Guardians work together to defeat the Chitauri and stop them from fucking blowing up the planet. Which gives Nova this really cool moment showing his true strength, when he physically stops one of the laser beams from touching Earth. And the other side of this is the origin episode for Power Man, episode 18, titled The Parent Trap. Opening up on Spidey, Power Man, Nick Fury, and Coulson all on the same mission together, they're heading to the Zodiac's secret base to stop them from making an alternate super soldier serum. So the superheroes and the super spies split up into two groups, with Spidey and Power Man going one way, and Nick and Coulson going the other. While in the Zodiac's base, Power Man, through a camera, sees that two of the Zodiac scientists are actually his missing parents. Though, given the seriousness of the mission, they are told to stay on task. So naturally, like teenagers, they completely disobey orders. So they go to find Power Man's parents, and as a stroke of luck for Spider-Man, on the way there, he actually bumps into the main objective of the mission, the Zodiac Key. And then, because it's Spider-Man, a stroke of unluck occurs. As he takes the key out, he realizes that it was holding up the entire base, stopping it from collapsing. So now, with a time limit on saving Power Man's parents, they kick it up to 11, as they start ripping doors off walls and running down halls to eventually bump into Luke's parents. Though there's this whole kerfuffle about Power Man not wanting to reveal that he is their son, as he doesn't feel like it's the right time, and the Cage scientists not wanting to go with S.H.I.E.L.D. and the superheroes as they are promised something from Scorpio, the leader of the Zodiacs. Both of them trying to go for the same goal of just reuniting. But before they can actually sit and communicate with each other, Scorpio enters the fight. To beat Power Man and Spidey, Scorpio takes some of the unfinished super soldier serum, which turns him into a roided out, Akira-esque monster. And as the roids keep growing and his body keeps expanding, he literally explodes in lava. And now that the immediate threat is very much dead, the Cages get to have a very heartwarming reunion scene. Episodes 21 and 22, titled Blade and The Howling Commandos, are very Halloween-esque specials, as we start with the gang fighting vampires in a graveyard, and with Marvel and vampires comes Blade, a character I unfortunately don't know a lot about, since the original movies came out before I was born. And while that's no excuse, I haven't really given them the time of day. Blade tells the Spidey gang to inform Nick Fury that Dracula is on his way. Yes, that Dracula. Which I also learned is just a character in Marvel. The only Dracula I know of is from, well, the stories. And Castlevania, of course. I am cultured. Dracula is after an Unk, an object that would make him and all undead basically invincible, which is just basically the end of the world. Nick Fury, not being a very big fan of the end of the world news, decides to put together a super team that would be perfect for this situation, that we meet in episode 22. But for now, our main gang are told that they're basically useless in this scenario and to sit this one out. So naturally, they go along anyway, because that's what a hero would do. And so while they're at a museum securing one half of the Ankh, Dracula comes in to attack. And it's during this fight, Dracula is actually able to control the minds of all the other members of Spider-Man's group, taking them hostage and leaving Spidey alone with Blade. Episode 21 ends with Nick introducing Spidey to a team that is perfect for the situation, the Howling Commandos. Which leads us directly into episode 22 under the same name. The Howling Commandos consists of characters like Werewolf by Night, the Living Mummy, Frankenstein's Monster, and a mysterious fourth character that they only refer to as the Big Guy for now. The Howling Commandos warn Spider-Man that because Dracula has taken over his friends' minds, Dracula now knows all of his secrets, including those he would hold close. So they go to check on Aunt May, and at just the right time, as Dracula has sent vampires after her. After a quick kerfuffle with a couple of vampires, they decide they need to take the fight to him. So instead of waiting for the Tri-Carrier, they decide to take the monster truck. Now, I've never heard of the Howling Commandos before, so I assume the monster truck is from the comics, but I really love them as a group. On the way to Transylvania, it is alluded to that Blade and the Howling Commandos have a history, one that's a little sour. So Spidey peps them up with a speech, though he does have to do this a few times throughout the episode because they really don't work well together. We also learn that the big guy that has been previously mentioned is the Man-Thing. Making their way into Dracula's castle, it is depicted very similarly to the Relativity painting by Maurits Cornelis Escher. Yes, that took me a while to pronounce. This style of architecture is often used to show confusion or a warped reality, similarly used in Squid Game. However, this architecture doesn't really affect them, as they use Werewolf by Night's sense of smell to just track down Dracula through all the mazes. And they start running hands on the batty bastard, giving Spidey enough time to set his team free. Though, through all the fighting, Dracula obtains both halves of the Ankh, and as he goes to activate it, luckily, the sun comes up and he is chased away. The end. The living mummy takes the Ankh and activates it anyway, turning him 50 feet tall, and ready to get revenge on Nick Fury for making him, well, part of S.H.I.E.L.D. So naturally, the 9 other superheroes chase after him through the portal, and we get this very cool kaiju fight between a full-sized living mummy and a sewer-grown man-thing. And so with all the other superheroes helping, including Nick Fury, the living mummy is quickly defeated and the Ankh is returned to its normal state. And so the day is saved. And it's at the end of the episode we actually learn that there is an additional member of the Howling Commandos, the Invisible Man, who had been watching over Aunt May the whole time. Episode 23 is our last solo episode, meaning that it's not a two-parter. This episode is titled Second Chance Hero, as we follow a cured Norman Osborn who's trying to right his previous wrongs. He's going around as a new superhero called Iron Patriot, which is basically just an Oscorp Iron Man, but either way. I personally really like this episode, as there is this emotional weight that kind of hovers over all of the characters and their actions. Norman is trying to better himself by being a better father, but also becoming a superhero and trying to right some of his previous wrongs, without letting the goblin part of his brain take over and ruin everything he's trying to do. And Spidey is stuck between being a spy for S.H.I.E.L.D. to make sure that Norman isn't doing anything bad, but also being very proud, noticing a man who's just trying to do better for himself. So the basic premise of the episode is, well, Spidey is sent to spy on Norman to see what he's doing, and in the process, Spidey and Iron Patriot get jumped by Doc Ock, who, if you didn't know, has a pretty big grudge against Norman. Ending this solo episode off with Norman accepting that it's going to take time for people to trust that he's doing the right thing. Even having a sit down with Nick Fury to hash out the prospects of becoming a full superhero. And so here we are, episodes 25 and 26, titled Return of the Sinister Six and Ultimate. These two episodes, like episodes 21 and 22, are two-parters, so they lead directly into one another. Episode 25 starts out with Spider-Man chasing an armored version of the Lizard, as he's tricked into going to where the Sinister Six is as they escape from prison. Iron Patriot also shows up to help Spider-Man, which is definitely needed as all of the members of the Sinister Six have upgraded armored suits thanks to Doc Ock. Also, the Sinister Six squad has been changed up, swapping Beetle out for the Scorpion. The rest of the gang show up to help fight the Sinister Six, each of them 1v1ing the same characters they did all the way back in episode 6. Though this time, they actually listen to the Iron Patriot's instructions, which leads to them getting their ass beat, and gives Doc Ock the opportunity to goblinify Norman Osborn once again. Meaning that Iron Patriot is no more, and the Goblin is back for the finale. Oh, and the rest of the gang get infected with the Goblin D's nuts juice, leaving Spider-Man all alone at the end of the episode. Yeah, it's pretty bad. Though, on a lighter note, Spidey does manage to free Connors from the Lizard and defeat the other members of the Sinister Six. Yay! Though Goblin does escape with the goblinized gang. And so lastly, episode 26. Ultimate. Naturally, we start with Spidey chasing after his group to free them from the Goblin, who is using the old helicarrier from the finale of Season 1 as a floating base, as he gets ready to cover New York with goblin gas. Spidey, once making it onto the helicarrier, basically gets his ass beaten instantly by the goblinized gang, who want to beat his ass so bad that even when he goes to leave, they chase him down to street level to continue the ass beating. Spidey only managing to get away from this when Coulson shows up in a jet. And it's during this halftime intermission breather where Spidey is given a device on his hand that allows him to turn Goblin back into Norman Osborn, though it only has one large dose. So the bell dings and Spidey jumps back down. This time, determined not to get his ass beat, he splits up the goblinized gang and traps them into cells, taking them on one at a time. Oh, my fucking elbow! While he's fighting them one-on-one, he appeals to their human sides as we get flashbacks to their one-on-one episodes that they share with each other. And while he does this, he jabs them with a quarter of the anti-goblin serum. And after going through each of his teammates, reversing them back to their human forms, we finally have a Spider Squad versus Goblin rematch, which, unlike all other previous fights, is balanced. Almost too balanced, as they end up in a stalemate, with Goblin ready to drop the Goblin gas on New York at any moment. The Spider Squad decide to tell Nick Fury to just blow them out of the fucking sky and take everything out all at once. Which, holy fuck, way to make the episode serious. But since it's a call Nick Fury straight up refuses to do, he sends a jet to go pick everyone up, which Spidey refuses and tackles Goblin out of the window. And also, to put the correct amount of credit on her name, White Tiger also stays behind with Spidey to try and help him. And so as they're all falling out of the window, plummeting towards the ground, Nova swoops in and picks them up one by one, narrowly just getting Spider-Man before Goblin splashes into the river below, leaving the season off with Norman still being trapped as the Goblin, and the Avengers show up to offer Spider-Man a place on the team. Wait, what? Okay, honestly, I am so very sorry that it took me 6 months to make a second part to this series. But I am so glad that I decided to come back and watch season 2. Every episode felt unique and memorable, and the season adding things like the KO cards and the intro cards really made it stand out. This season definitely deserves its 0.1 rating above season 1. And while I'm yet to still watch season 3 and 4, yes, I will make a video on them, I honestly think that some of my favorite episodes will still come from this season. So, thanks for waiting and watching. And, you know, the whole like and subscribe that everyone always does at the end of videos. And I'll see you next time for season 3 in hopefully less than 6 months.